Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really interesting set of materials you sent over focusing on people moving from Bangladesh and Myanmar into India, often without, the standard legal documents.
That's right. A complex topic.
Yeah, definitely. So our mission here is to kind of cut through all that complexity, look at what these sources say, and pull out the really key insights.
Get to the heart of it. It's a major challenge for India, and the sources you've shared, academic papers, maybe some news reports, give us different angles.
Exactly. We want to understand the core issues, maybe even some surprising aspects, without everyone having to read, everything themselves.
Absolutely. And what strikes me immediately from this material is just the sheer scale and how many layers there are. It's definitely not straightforward.
Okay, let's dive in then. The sources start by trying to define what we mean by illegal or undocumented migration. Sounds simple, but I guess it's more than just crossing a border without permission.
It is, yeah. I mean, the basic definition, according to these sources, is exactly that. Moving across borders without legal permission, or maybe using irregular ways to do it.
Okay.
But, and this is really important, the sources emphasize the human side. We're talking about people, families, often in incredibly difficult situations.
Right. What kind of situations?
Well, the research really paints a picture of often extreme poverty, sometimes lacking basic things like food, shelter. Health issues are common too. And then there's the risk of exploitation and this constant background fear of being caught and deported. It's a tough reality.
A very harsh picture. And the sources also stress that people are coming for all sorts of reasons, a mix of things.
Exactly. Economic reasons, social factors, political instability back home. It's a blend. And it's not like this just started yesterday.
Okay, so there's a history here.
A long one. The sources actually point out that migration from what's now Bangladesh, particularly the eastern parts, goes way back, even before partition.
Really? Before 1947?
Yes. But then, after Bangladesh became independent in 71, migration continued, mostly driven by economics. That's one major stream.
Okay, so that's the Bangladesh angle, largely economic and long-standing. What about Myanmar? That seems more recent in the sources.
It is, especially the surge linked to the Rohingya crisis.
Yeah.
The military actions in 2017 and then the coup in 2021. These events caused huge displacement.
Right. The persecution of the Rohingya.
Precisely. That drove many into India seeking safety. So two major streams, different primary drivers, but both contributing significantly.
And where do they mostly end up in India? The border states, I assume.
Primarily, yes. The sources name states like West Bengal, Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, Mizoram, those sharing borders with Bangladesh or Myanmar. Makes sense. But it doesn't always stop there. People move onwards, deeper into India, towards cities, looking for work, trying to build some kind of life.
Okay, let's unpack the why a bit more, these push and pull factors. For Bangladesh, you said it's mainly economic.
Overwhelmingly so, based on the analysis here. We're talking about significant economic hardship, lack of jobs, persistent poverty.
And natural disasters. Do they play a role?
Yes. Definitely. Bangladesh is very vulnerable to natural disasters, and they can displace huge numbers of people, pushing them to look elsewhere. India, even if the reality is tough, is often seen as having, better prospects.
Better economic opportunities, even if marginal.
That seems to be the perception, yes. A kind of economic imbalance driving the movement.
Okay. And for Myanmar, you mentioned the Rohingya persecution, but is it only that?
That's a major driver, especially for the Rohingya community who faced terrible violence and discrimination. But it's broader, too.
Broader how?
Political instability across Myanmar, the military crackdowns affecting various groups, a general lack of security. These also push people to leave. For many from Myanmar, it's less about economics and more about finding basic safety.
That's a really critical difference. Seeking refuge versus seeking opportunity, although sometimes maybe it's both.
It can be blurred, absolutely. And the sources are careful to point out that even if India offers some hope, the life for many migrants remains precarious, low wages, unstable work.
Yeah, the reality on the ground can be very different from the hope that drove them there.
Exactly. Which brings us to the challenges this creates for India. The sources call it unregulated migration, and it causes a ripple effect. What stands out to you from the materials?
Well, the first thing is the strain on resources.
Yeah.
That seems obvious. Land, jobs, basic services like water or healthcare in areas where migrants settle.
That's a big one, particularly in areas that might already be struggling with resources. It inevitably creates pressure.
And social tensions.
Yes, the analysis mentions that. Potential friction between migrant groups and local communities, sometimes over jobs or resources, sometimes cultural differences. It can get complicated.
I can imagine. And what about law and order? Do the sources touch on that?
They do. There's the point that vulnerable, undocumented people can unfortunately be exploited by criminal networks, maybe get pulled into smuggling or other illegal stuff. And a more fundamental problem for the government is just planning, governance. How do you plan services or allocate resources if you don't actually know how many people are there?
The data problem. Lack of accurate numbers.
Exactly. It makes effective policy really, really difficult.
And then there's the whole security angle, especially with the borders being described as porous.
Very porous. It's a huge challenge. Long stretches of border, difficult terrain, rivers, forests, hard to patrol effectively everywhere, all the time.
So that raises security concerns beyond just migration.
Yes, the analysis mentions concerns about these porous borders potentially being exploited by anti-national elements or for trafficking. It adds that national security dimension.
Okay, so India has laws to deal with foreigners and citizenship. What are the key ones mentioned?
Right, the legal framework. The sources point to several core acts. There's the Foreigners Act from 1946, quite old, gives the government power to regulate foreigners' entry and stay. Then the Registration of Foreigners Act, 1939. The Passport Act from 1920. And of course, the Citizenship Act of 1955, which defines who is an Indian citizen.
So the laws exist, but enforcement must be the issue.
Enforcement is definitely a challenge, especially with the Foreigners Act. Proving someone's status after they've been in the country for a while, the sheer numbers, it's complex.
So what is India doing about it, according to the sources, in terms of border management?
Well, there are efforts to strengthen security. More fencing is mentioned, building more border outposts, using better surveillance, tech cameras, sensors, that sort of thing.
And patrols.
Coordinated patrols, yes, by forces like the BSF on the Bangladesh border and Assam Rifles often involved near Myanmar. But again, the geography makes it incredibly tough.
Right. Now, the NRC National Register of Citizens, that comes up a lot. What's the aim there based on these documents?
The NRC, particularly the exercise in Assam that gets a lot of attention in the sources, was fundamentally about trying to create a definitive list to document who is a legal citizen and, by default, identify those who aren't.
But it's been controversial.
Hugely controversial. Lots of challenges with implementation, documentation, appeals. It highlighted just how complex proving citizenship can be in that region, given the history. And the sources mention the idea of potentially doing a nationwide NRC, too.
And how does the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, fit into this picture?
Okay, so the CAA is different. While the NRC is about identifying, the CAA offers a pathway to citizenship.
For whom specifically?
According to the sources, it's for specific religious minorities, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians, who reportedly fled persecution from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan and entered India before a certain date, December 2014.
And the controversy there is?
The main point of debate highlighted is that it excludes Muslims from that list of communities eligible under the Act, raising questions about secularism and equal treatment. So you have the NRC trying to identify and the CAA potentially offering citizenship to some identified but not others. It creates a complex interaction.
Definitely sounds complex. So despite these laws and initiatives like NRC and CAA, there are still major hurdles. What are the biggest ones the sources keep coming back to?
I'd say the lack of reliable data is probably number one. We touched on it, but it's critical. How many undocumented immigrants are actually in India?
Are there any numbers?
There are estimates mentioned. One older source cited suggests maybe over 15 million at one point. UNHCR has figures for registered Rohingya refugees, but a single, accurate, comprehensive number, it just doesn't seem to exist. And that hampers everything.
Can't solve a problem if you can't measure it.
Pretty much. Then there's the whole humanitarian side. Security is a concern, yes, but these are people often fleeing awful situations. Balancing security with human rights is a constant tension.
Yeah, the human stories behind the policies. It's easy to forget that.
It is, and those individual experiences really show why finding solutions is both urgent and difficult.
And what about dealing with the neighboring countries, Bangladesh and Myanmar, getting them to take people back?
That's another huge challenge mentioned. Diplomatic sensitivities. The sources say both countries have often been, let's say, reluctant to accept large numbers of returnees identified by India.
So even if India identifies people, repatriation isn't guaranteed.
Not at all. And just the logistics of any large-scale identification and deportation process, it would be immense. Bureaucratically, practically, very challenging.
It sounds incredibly difficult on the ground.
It really does. Plus, there's the difficulty of distinguishing who is a genuine refugee needing protection under international law and who is primarily an economic migrant. That line can be blurry, but the distinction matters legally and ethically.
Okay, so looking forward, if things continue as they are, what do the sources suggest might happen?
The general feeling from the analysis is that without more comprehensive solutions, these problems, the resource strains, social tensions, security issues, they're likely to continue, maybe even get worse. It impacts stability in the border regions especially.
Not a great outlook. So what are the potential solutions discussed? Is there any consensus?
It seems the consensus is that it needs a multi-pronged approach, not just one silver bullet.
Like what?
Well, continuing to strengthen border management is key: security, technology, infrastructure. But that's not enough on its own.
Right.
There's also a need for a clearer, maybe more effective legal framework within India for identifying and managing undocumented migrants, and crucially, addressing the root causes.
Back in Bangladesh and Myanmar?
Yes. Through diplomacy, maybe development aid, trying to improve the conditions that push people to leave in the first place. It has to involve engagement with the neighbors.
That makes sense.
What else?
Better data, definitely. Improving how migration flows are tracked and analyzed, and always this recurring theme: balancing security needs with humanitarian concerns and international norms.
Regional cooperation, too.
Yes, fostering cooperation between India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar is seen as pretty vital for any sustainable, long-term solution. But that tension between security and human rights runs through everything. Absolutely. You've really distilled the essence of it. It's deeply complex, with no easy fixes and lots of competing pressures.
That's the picture the sources paint, for sure.
So, to leave our listeners with something to think about, considering, the deep historical ties in the region, the shared borders that have always been somewhat fluid, what kind of truly innovative but also ethical solutions could possibly bridge that gap? The gap between India's legitimate security needs and the unavoidable humanitarian reality of people moving across borders. What might that look like long-term for the stability of the whole region and for, basic human dignity? Something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us today.